Bunkley will speak briefly about the League and the Detroit group.
Yes, my name is Deb Bunkley. I am the Communications Director for the Detroit League of Women Voters, which also includes Hamtramck and Highland Park. The League of Women Voters is the nation's most effective grassroots organization, established in 1920 after winning the right to vote for women. The League is one of the nation's most respected community-based organizations, and the Detroit League started in 1919, just so you know. In addition to our work in elections areas, League volunteers work on issues of local importance, such as voter rights and education, and how the political system works that affect residents in Detroit, Hamtramck, and Highland Park. We do not support or oppose any candidates for office or political parties. We want everyone to vote so our elected leaders represent our entire community. We're a voice for all, working to connect people directly with government. We provide and work with facts. We educate and we advocate for change. And remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. The Michigan League of Women Voters will have a Zoom program about tough questions on the Michigan state budget on Tuesday, September 16th. Cheryl Bookoff has a link to put in the chat for anyone who wants to register. Did you want to say anything about it, Cheryl, as well?
Well, I can, but I'll put it in the chat. I think that would be the best thing. Then you'd at least know how to register for that. So.
Mm-hmm. And I was supposed to have Kirandeep Sandhu, who's representing the League of Conservation Voters, in this program, but I think she wasn't able to join us. She will be hosting a program at the NEF branch on September 25th, and it's titled Know Your Voting Rights. And they will have registrations for voters or prospective voters after the presentation. Please put any questions you have in the chat. If you want information about that program, just email me. I'll give my email address in a little bit. Please put any questions in the chat, and Ruth will ask them at the end of the presentation. If possible, near the end of the program, we will probably allow people to turn on mics and ask the speaker directly. Our speaker tonight, Eric Lupher, is president of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. He will be speaking tonight on the role of Detroit's mayor to prepare voters in making choices in November's elections. For more than 100 years, the goal of the Citizens Research Council has been to provide tools to the citizens of Michigan to secure good state and local government. Like both DPL and the League of Women Voters, the Citizens Research Council does not lobby, support candidates for public office, or take positions on ballot questions. Eric has presented for us in the past, and the programs have been informative and well presented. Eric?
All right, thank you. So a little bit more about the Citizens Research Council. We are a 501c3 not-for-profit organization that is able to do the work that we do with the support of foundations, businesses, and individuals. You can find our work at crcmich.org, crcmich.org. And I'm going to be speaking today about the Detroit mayor, his or her powers and the powers of the office, based on a paper that we did in 2001. We've, of course, Detroit has adopted a new charter since then. So some things have changed from that paper, and I will reflect that as we go. But you can find that paper itself. I just put the URL for that in the website. So start off by reminding you of your high school civics class. The idea that we have three branches of government generally: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And when we speak of the mayor, we are speaking of the executive branch of municipal government, Detroit city government. So what does that mean to execute? Basically is to carry things out. And we charge the mayor, in this case, the governor, the president, uh, the county executive. We charge those people with overseeing the administrative branch of government and carrying out the laws that are adopted by the state legislature, by Congress, in the case of Detroit, by the Detroit City Council. So he or she does not make the laws. They may suggest them, take ideas to city council, but ultimately it's up to somebody else to execute them. Detroit does not formally have a judicial branch. It has, it hosts district court, and but it's all part of state government in the line with county government. So really, for Detroit, formally, we're only talking about the executive and the legislative branch. I'm going to talk many times as we go about Detroit being a strong mayor form of municipal government. Now, let me sort of explain what that is. Generally, when we think of government, we think of the federal branch. Obviously, we have the president. There are no other executive branch offices at the federal level, so all power rests with the president, and he, maybe someday a she, appoints department heads and deputies and so on and so forth to help that person execute the laws of the nation. At the state level, we have the governor's office, but we also, within the executive branch, have the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, obviously the Lieutenant Governor, and an appointed Superintendent of Public Education. So the executive powers are a little more diffuse at the state level. But again, you would call it a strong system of government to have the governor overseeing most of the departments and executing, administering the laws that are adopted by the legislature and making it all work. When we look at city government in Michigan and generally throughout the United States, there's different forms of government. Most of our government in Michigan, whether you're talking about townships, most of the cities are very small, a couple square miles, several thousand people. And we call that the system of government for most of them, a weak mayor, council manager form of government. So generally they're electing, it's up to them. They're going to adopt their own city charter, but it's generally 5 to 7 people to be on city council. One of them is either chosen by the city council or the highest vote getter will serve as mayor. They don't have the veto powers. They don't have any extraordinary powers. It's just somebody's got to be in charge and they pick somebody. And most of the times these governments will have a city manager, a township administrator, a county administrator, something like that. So we're hiring a professional to do the day-to-day work of running the government. And then the council is just meeting to set policy, adopt a budget, do all that sort of thing. The form of government you might be most familiar with in Detroit that's analogous to this is the school system, where we elect a school board. They hire a superintendent, which is analogous to a city manager. He or she is responsible for day-to-day administration of the school system, and the school board is setting policy, creating budget. Many years ago, we had what's called a commission form of city government. Grand Rapids still has relics of this. In that form of government, you don't have a true administrator, but each commissioner is responsible for different parts of city government. One in charge of public safety, another for public works. So their job is to make sure that their little section of city government works, represent it to the overall board, the city commission. And then we have strong mayors. We only have very few within the 1,800 units of government, maybe 20 different cities are what we would call strong mayor. And again, going back to what I said before, most of our cities in Michigan are very small. And even those that have grown up, they've clung to that council manager form of government. So even as they've grown, they've stayed with that form of government. In Detroit, we also have for the executive branch, the city clerk, of course, administering elections and doing the different responsibilities. It's currently she is independently elected and works alongside the mayor, but is responsible to the people. She doesn't answer to the mayor. So let's talk a little bit about some of the powers and responsibilities of the mayor. A thing to keep in mind as we go forward is that cities, Detroit, Ann Arbor, Traverse City, they are all creatures of the state, and they can only exercise those powers granted to them in the state constitution or by the legislature through state law. So most of the times for city government, it is not, while we would expect Congress and the state legislature to think about ways of solving problems and creating new programs or tweaking the ones that we have, most of the times when we talk about the mayor or city council, they're finding ways to execute those responsibilities vested in them through the Constitution and the state legislature. Let me think what else you need to know as we go forward. Oh, sort of again, the checks and balances. As a strong mayor, the Detroit mayor is able to do a lot of things that I'll talk about, but we would expect, and indeed in the Detroit City Charter, we see a number of examples where the city council is charged with providing a check on the executive, providing oversight of the departments, really making sure that everything is going the way that it goes. The Detroit mayor derives its power first and foremost from the city charter. And if you open up that document, you see a number of places where the powers are laid out. Those that I'll go through for the rest of my presentation. We also see that state law vests responsibilities in the mayor, often is those laws apply to all cities or all local governments in Michigan. And there's limited powers, limited ability for state law to tell the local governments of what they have to do or tell the mayors of their responsibilities. Part of this is constrained by the 1978 Tax Limitation Amendment to the Constitution, what we colloquially call the Headley Amendment, that requires any state mandates of local government to be funded by the state. So the state tends to be very careful to not mandate things, but say, if you're going to do it, then these are the responsibilities of the mayor. And also, we see a number of responsibilities of the mayor laid out in the Uniform Budgeting and Accounting Act that provides the mayor with certain budgetary and fiscal responsibilities. In some cases, we see Detroit ordinances vesting responsibilities in the mayor to execute what's being done. And then there's certain implied powers. When we talk about the executive and administration of city laws, state laws, federal laws, the charter or those ordinances, they don't necessarily lay out everything that the mayor is meant to do, but it is said that he or she is the executive and expected to execute those things. And so there's a number of responsibilities that are implied within that. And there's certain soft powers I'll speak to a little bit later, representing the city in different ways. They're not spelled out in law, not spelled out in ordinance or city charter, but implied based on the position, being the largest city in the state, one of the major cities in the United States. There are some limitations on the mayor. The mayor has veto power over ordinances enacted by city council, but likewise, the city council can amend or veto actions by the mayor. So while the mayor may propose a budget, propose plans, ordinances, contracts, appointees, other policy actions, it's up to city council to implement, to actually do the job of enacting an ordinance or adopting a budget, things like that. And they have the authority to delay, alter, block such actions. So this is, while we talk about a unitary president, there's no such thing at city level. The mayor is beholden and must work with city council to get things done. There are certain provisions of state law that restrain the authority of the powers of the mayor. So the provisions in the public employee relations, for instance, the ability to expect things of the city employees. They cannot ask them to do campaigning on their behalf. There's certain things like that. And the union rules that are implicit within those labor relations constrain the ability of the mayor to do things. The city charter builds in certain limitations, what can and can't be done, where the mayor's authorities end and commissions, departments, city council, all those things, one ends and the other begins. And the city charter also creates a number of commissions that I'll talk a little bit about later, but generally relating to police, fire, water and sewer, human rights, arts, several others. So the drafters of the city charter have defrayed some of the power and said that the people should have a voice on a number of things. And so the mayor then has some authority because he or she is appointing members of those commissions, presumably to do the will of the mayor's office. But having appointed those people, they can only be removed for cause for the most part. And so there is some power deferred to them as they go forward. So let me go through some of those things that I've talked about in a little more detail here. The powers of the mayor, some are implied, as I say, and when you open up the US Constitution, the state constitution, when you open up the Detroit City Charter, the discussion of the executive powers generally tells them, says you're responsible for the executive branch. And it's very short in that way. It doesn't go through and line by line detail what types of things are implied in that, but it just implies as the one responsible for the executive branch, you need to make sure all those things work. One of the greatest powers of the mayor and a real responsibility as we think about transition from one mayor to the next is the ability to surround him or herself with smart people capable of executing the different responsibilities of the departments. So that appointment power that rests with the city charter is very important. Something that we're going to have to keep an eye on mostly after November, but hopefully between now and November, you'll hear from the candidates what types of people are aligning with their camp and how they might fill some of the positions. The Detroit City Charter details those appointment powers, and some of them are standard. And as I go through some of these, I would just note that Detroit has far more departments, far more responsibilities than almost, well, I don't have to say almost, like than any other city. So the appointment of a department head for planning and finance and human resources, environment and building, community and economic development, and consumer affairs and public works, and the fire commission, the historical commission, board of water commissioners, the chief of police, the public lighting, recreation, transportation, zoological, arts commission. Just a number of departments that fall within the executive branch and responsibilities to finding good people to run each of those, as well as deputies in many of those, to work with the director and share some of the responsibilities of the day-to-day operation. There are some exceptions to this. The city's corporate counsel, the lawyer, if you will, for the city, is appointed by the mayor, but must be approved by city council. For the arts, the director and deputy director are appointed by the Arts Commission. For the police, the candidates, the police commission will work with a headhunter, something like that, and identify a number of candidates and vet them to narrow the field, submit those to the mayor, and it's up to the mayor to appoint them, subject to the approval of city council. But the mayor could not just operate a friends and family plan in that way and find Uncle Gus a job as chief of police going forward. The water and sewerage department, the director and deputy are appointed by the Board of Water Commissioners and serve at the pleasure of the board. Museums, this is the same type of thing, appointed by the commission. The Arts Council, appointed by the mayor, but the council may appoint an executive director to serve at the pleasure of the council. So a number of ways here. The authority to appoint is diffused with the input of city council, or the commissions play some role in sharing that responsibility. One way that the mayor of Detroit, but any chief executive in any city has extraordinary powers, is in the world of economic development. State law authorizes a number of ways that municipal government can empower supplement the abilities to engage in tax increment financing, to work with developers in a number of ways. In the ability of the mayor to make this happen, he or she will appoint the governing bodies of the business improvement districts, the Economic Development Corporation, neighborhood development corporations, the Downtown Development Authority, Tax Increment Finance Authority, Local Development Finance Authority, the Brownfield Development Refinancing Act, Housing Sum Clearance Projects, the Civil Service. Well, that one moves beyond, but generally the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, the leadership of that is appointed by the mayor, and within that, all of these different authorities or acts are executed with governing bodies that are appointed by the mayor. So I started to say the civil service, this gets beyond the economic development, but this is state law laying out that the city, if it chooses to have a civil service commission, must work within the confines of state law to execute that. And there's some state laws that are particular to Detroit. So the Detroit Port Authority, there's of course no other port authority, Detroit Port Authority, and any other community. The mayor is authorized to appoint leadership of that, dealing with the medical centers, dealing with empowerment zones and the public health code. Those responsibilities all rest with the mayor. Let's talk a little bit about finances. Again, having a strong mayor really is important to understand the dynamics of the city of Detroit. Most of the responsibilities, as we think about this, are vested in state law, written out in state law, and what we see in the Detroit City Charter is a mirroring of that, an actualizing of what's written in state law. So the ability to appropriate, and no money in government can be spent without an appropriation. The ability to appropriate rests with the legislative branch, in this case, the Detroit City Council. This is a long-running fundamental part of our structure of government in America. It dates back to the Magna Carta, really. So we see it at the federal level, we see it at state level, we see it at municipal government, we see it with school districts, county commission, county government, and so on. But given that the city council, the legislative branch, has to appropriate, they're really beholden in many ways through the structures of the Detroit city government to work with the mayor on coming up with a budget, dealing with the audit, dealing with a number of other things. So the mayor is responsible, working with the finance department, to identify the needs of each department, think about staffing needs, think about resources needed, and craft a budget, and that is introduced to city council. The mayor is responsible, in addition to that preparation, to identifying any amendments that need to happen if the budget is adopted and resources aren't flowing in as was expected. It's the mayor's responsibility to identify the deficiencies and suggest amendments to the city council that maybe the appropriations to different departments should be scaled back to live within the city's means. the state law and the city charter also vest administrative responsibility and financial reporting responsibilities with the mayor. So once the budget is introduced, prepared and introduced, the city council has to adopt it, and then it's the mayor's responsibility. Well, so in addition to adopting that, the budget, the council will, as part of that process, levy the property tax or set tax rates, income tax, utility users, excise tax, the gaming tax, if they chose to get into that, to make sure that they have the resources that needed to execute that, to authorize any bonding if there's part of the capital budget to improve structures in any way. The Detroit mayor has veto power, in this case, a line item veto power. If city council strays from the recommendations in any significant way and include something in the part of the budget that's not consistent with the goals, the mayor may veto that, and the council has the ability to override that with a 2/3 vote. The council being 9 members, that would require 6 votes of the city council. So it's sort of, again, that creates the checks and balances, the need for give and take, discussions between the executive and the legislative branches throughout the whole process. I talked a little bit about amendment, the administration, once that budget is in place. And that generally happens very shortly before the beginning of the fiscal year. So the mayor, having appointed each of the department heads, works with them to execute the laws and carry out the programs within the budgets. And then when the fiscal year is done, the annual financial report, as required by state law, is the responsibility of the mayor. So he or she will work with the finance department to make sure all the accounting is happening throughout the year, to identify an auditor and oversee the assembling of the financial reports. And all purchasing happens through the mayor's office. So the part of the administration, you need supplies, you need everything, and city council does not have the ability to engage in purchasing. The mayor's office does. The mayor, as head of the executive branch, has the ability to organize the city within some constraints. There are certain departments that are included in the city charter and must exist. Budgeting, planning, finance, law department, human resources, environmental affairs, the public safety, police and fire, generally. But then there's some discretion beyond that for many of the other departments, and what we've seen, especially during Mayor Duggan's time in office, the ability to create new departments or tweak the responsibilities of certain departments, as he's recognized a shortcoming in city administration or a need that wasn't being met in the private sector, and trying to find ways for city government to help meet that need. So he has, in a very dynamic way, used the organization, in some ways straying far from what you would recognize in the first place as what we wanted from the city government, the organization. So a new mayor, I think, will come in and take a fresh look at the organization chart and perhaps move some pieces around. The negotiation of labor agreements, of course, the non-uniform city employees have their own unions and they negotiate with the city. The mayor being in charge of that will set the tone for the labor negotiations. For the uniform employees, they're working within the confines of state law and the city charter, and the ability for them to ultimately engage in compulsory binding arbitration hems in the negotiations in some way, but it also empowers the mayor more so than with the non-uniform employees, the ability to negotiate that. So yeah, that's, I think that in a nutshell. I talked a little bit about at the beginning some of the sort of softer responsibilities of the mayor. So the charter provides for the mayor um, to assemble community meetings, and we've seen Mayor Duggan create a Department of Neighborhoods. So, so overseeing, be the one spearheading the administration, the reaching out to the people and trying to hear their needs is something that we see the mayor's office executing. Being a voice for the city and the state and national affairs. So when, NBC News is looking for a story and wants to hear the perspective of a voice from Michigan, municipal issues or something like the COVID efforts. It's often the Detroit mayor. It's been Mayor Duggan in the news quite often talking about these things. So being the voice for the city, and in a similar way, being the liaison for the city between different interests. So I feel very strongly that the mayor and the superintendent of the schools need to have a very close working relationship. And that sort of that's not written into the charter, it's nothing like that, but it needs to be very strong. The mayor will be the key liaison with SUMCOG and therefore the relationship of the city to the suburban communities and county government and things like that. Also, the mayor tends to be the liaison with different business groups, the chambers of commerce, the economic growth partnerships and things like that. So let me just wrap up with that. The mayor is cast with a lot of responsibilities. Being the biggest city, having more departments than other cities, tends to amplify those responsibilities, and the charter creating a lot of parts of it provide even greater authority to the mayor, makes the mayor of Detroit one of the strong mayors, not in terms of physical strength, but the ability to execute laws and set the tone for the city, very strong relative to many other cities in the nation or certainly in Michigan. So with that, Ruth, I think I look to you to see if there's been any questions submitted or where we go from here.
Not yet, but I have some of my own while folks are thinking about and digesting all of the information you've given us, Eric. One is just a little bit more information about, so you mentioned that the mayor has some flexibility in maybe creating or appointing like departments or commissioners for things. I wonder if you can speak a little bit more to that. Obviously, there's some that are required. Is there, and I assume some of that is sort of bound in by the city council and budgetary reasons, as you were just mentioning. So from my understanding, and you can maybe speak a little bit more to it and correct me if I'm wrong, the city council would make or approve a budget that the mayor submits, and which would then allow the mayor to really do the hiring that would be required to create that new department. And that might require also an amendment, or yeah, could you just speak a little bit more to how that flexibility works in reality?
Yeah,
between those two?
So the mayor can choose to create the new departments, and again, he or she will work with city council. And generally, we think about the size of the pie is fixed, right? Detroit has a $1.6 billion budget. And to decide that you want to create new departments doesn't mean that you're increasing from 1.6 to 1.8 billion. It means that we just have to slice the pie a little bit thinner in certain places and presumably taking responsibilities from one department and shifting it to that new department in some way. So it's just then an allocation of resources. And then, as you suggest, the city council in creating the budget has to appropriate resources for that new department. Obviously resources for a department head and a deputy, but also the staffing needed, the FTEs and the office space and desk and paper and copy machines and everything else. So without that appropriation, the ability of the mayor to create the new department or things like that is rather meaningless. A department with no people. So that hand-in-hand relationship between mayor and city council is very important.
Could the mayor say like cut staffing or cut things from one without the approval of the council to make another department?
Yes, an appropriation is not a mandate to spend. So the mayor has the ability to pull back, and there is some ability to reallocate between departments, usually deferred to emergency responsibilities or things like that. But the ability to do that in one fiscal year, here we are in September, 3 months into the city council's fiscal year, the mayor, notwithstanding he's a short timer now, should he choose to create a new department, well, that's great for the next 9 months, but then city council will have to take action for the next fiscal year. So yes, he could do that now, but if you want it to be sustainable and long-standing and impactful, it's really important to work with city council so that next fiscal year gets funded and everything is set on a path forward.
Yeah. And then you mentioned that sort of keeping track of who the candidates have around them and who they might start placing into these commissions or departments is really important. How can we, as like if we're not super on top of tracking all of that information or who those people even maybe are, how can we as voters evaluate the people that the candidates have around them? Is there a good way? How would you go about
Yeah,
that or recommend?
I think this is, we talk about the media as the fourth rail of government, really, the voice of the people. So through what the League of Women Voters does, right, and others, creating forums and having part of that question process. Who will you appoint as a finance head? Who will you appoint as this or that, whatever is important to you individually or in your business interest? And then to the extent you're able to, trying to get the media, trying to get people, the news, the Free Press, the Chronicle, Bridge, Detroit, the radio stations, as they're interacting, because they have far more time and ability to attend all of these different candidate forums and things like that, to ask those questions and sit down with the candidates and try to get that information. Now, it's going to be far easier for the media to find out that Joe Blow is an MBA and has run a business before and is qualified to run the finance department than you or I just going on LinkedIn and trying to find that.
Right. Yeah, it's not very efficient that way.
Yeah.
Um, the other question I have is maybe regarding like a larger sort of, and you mentioned that the mayor is the voice of the city, is one of the soft powers that they have. And particularly right now, while the federal government is sort of bringing in, um, say, National Guard people or things like that, and in some ways maybe threatening some kind of almost sort of takeover of different cities. Um, how do you see Detroit's mayor playing into that? Like currently, we haven't had any sort of mention that that might happen here in Detroit, but that is something that's sort of seems to be happening in a few different cities throughout the nation. And I wonder, you know, do you see a particularly new role in that for Detroit's mayor in this sort of current context?
No, in this case, the mayor has the bullhorn and the soapbox to stand on. But that's about it. The control of the National Guard rests with the governor of the state. And I'm hardly a lawyer, but I've been trying to pay attention to this stuff. Um, Without the governor acting, the president has limited authority, notwithstanding the ability or the inclination to do what he wants and ask forgiveness later. But the mayor has no ability to stop the National Guard at the city boundaries or to in any way act legally to put a stop to it. It really is above his or her pay grade.
Those were some of my questions. I don't know if any of you all, I don't see any questions in the chat right now. We could maybe open it up to speakers if we want to do that.
Yes,
Jennifer,
if
maybe.
people would like to ask their questions directly, I'd be happy to unmute you.
You can maybe there's a react button at the bottom of the screen. If you're on a computer, I think it might be in a different place on a mobile device. But you can raise your hand and we will unmute you. And you're welcome, obviously, to also put your question in the chat still.
Looks like Cheryl has a question.
Cheryl, you're muted.
Yes, I've unmuted you. I've asked you to unmute now.
Unmute. Okay. I know I look like I'm really engaged in this, but any rate, we have two candidates for mayor that both come from a fairly religious background, one very much so, and one through her family connections at the very least. I've wondered because I have a strong concern about separation, and really one of my major things is separation of church and state. And I was wondering what the city charter, if anything, says about that, or how do we assure that there is some separation? Because it makes it hard. I'm not trying to say a person couldn't be mayor who's certainly a minister or is strongly involved in a church. And we've had many, I'm sure, in the past, and that I don't know if that's ever really come up. But when the Reverend Kinschlock, I'm not saying his name probably right, but when he, I think at one point said he was going to be working on Sundays for the church in a sense, and then he since said no. So I'm just wondering, what is there to prevent somebody having a second job, this one being the church, which deals with separation maybe of church and state, but the other is any other second job that people have? Is there anything in there that says one cannot, as a mayor, be employed in two jobs?
It is been a while since I've read the charter all the way through. I don't recall anything speaking to the separation of church and state. So I think we would fall back to certainly the US and in some ways the state constitution for guidance on that. The city charter doesn't doesn't speak to the ability to have second jobs either for the mayor or the city council members or the clerk. It really is a full-time job though. You
It
know,
sounds like it.
you know, beyond 40 hours a week, there's just things going on and accidents, sewer line breaks, things like that don't happen between 9 and 5, and you don't have to worry about it. So the mayor is always on call, always weary that the phone's going to ring and he or she will be called to do something. So, to do that on Sundays, I think maybe there's the ability to carry that out, and there's certainly staff within his church, churches, I suppose, able to help him execute that. Beyond that, I think it's a question for the voters of whether that's something, obviously you've expressed your opinion, how others feel about that remains to be seen. I think back to Coleman Young, who, obviously wasn't in this position but certainly had a strong connection with the Baptist churches and the Baptist ministers within the city and a strong, I don't think it bridged the division of church and state the way that we think about now, but Detroit is a city of churches and we're never too far from it. So I suppose it certainly is now and will be for some time an issue to keep an eye on.
Thank you.
We also have a question in the chat. Why is voter turnout in Detroit so low, and what can be done to raise it?
What can be done to raise it is, events like this, having people understand government better, understand being able to navigate. But I haven't done the research. I've just thought about this a great deal. It's distrust in government. It's a growing apathy that voices are not being heard and why participate if things are just going to happen the way they are anyway. So I sort of feel it comes in ebbs and flows and perhaps we hope Detroit has reached a low point and that will pick up in the future. But it's just gaining confidence in government again and the willingness to participate and feel that your voice is heard, I think.
Maybe to sort of build on that, can you speak to and I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like I heard someone say that the mayoral elections are purposely put on off elections from the presidential because there's lower turnout. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Yeah, I don't think that. I think it is a way to encourage voter turnout and not be affected by the coattails of the presidential or the gubernatorial candidates. Michigan has a very long ballot. We vote on many, many offices, more than many other states. So you take our last election, voting on obviously the president, a U.S. senator, your congressman. We didn't last year vote on the state senate, but a state representative. and you can just go through voting on judges, voting on the many offices, and then if we have ballot questions. So if a mayoral election were happening at the same time, it would be very far down on the ballot. It's sort of hierarchical that the president or state offices and county and local. So we know that voter drop off is an issue. That being that people vote, on that high profile office, the president or the governor, and then some of the other ones, and then whether it's through boredom or lack of homework, that they don't know those candidates and therefore won't voice their opinion. So if 60% of the people showed up and voted and they all voted for president, you might get down to that mayoral's office further down the ballot, and now only 35 or 40% of the people are voting. So whether it's in an off year or in a mayoral candidate, participation is going to be an issue. Detroit and many other cities have followed this pattern to have the off-year elections. And it's really, I think, designed not so much, because when the Detroit was adopting its city charter, I'm going to fail, it was 1916 or something, the first city charter. This wasn't an issue then, right? They weren't worried about lack of voter turnout on these types of things the way we are today. But it was really as a means to move it away from those high profile elections and put the spotlight solely on these municipal elections.
Thanks. That was elucidating for me. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you. Does
Okay.
anyone else have any questions?
I
Cheryl?
do. I'm
Of
sorry.
course you do, Cheryl.
Yes.
We
I
can
was trying to
depend on
look.
you.
Well, in the relationship between the mayor and representing Detroit and the county and Wayne County, what is that relationship and what affects that relationship between the
so
county,
right.
yeah,
So as our state was designed, we were supposed to have, and for many years had what was called a county board of supervisors, and the mayor and other representatives from the city and a supervisor from every township would sit on the governing body or of the county government to serve as that legislative branch. In the 1960s, that was ruled unconstitutional, a violation of the one man, one vote, because the mayor of Detroit, with at that time almost 2 million people, had the same vote as the mayor of Livonia with 100,000 people. So that was ruled unconstitutional. Now we have independently elected county commissions and an independently elected county executive for Wayne County. So we're really much the way I spoke about the relationship between the mayor and the superintendent of Detroit Public Schools. We're looking for that same relationship between the county and the county executive to have a strong working relationship. Obviously, the county executive has more people, more geography to worry about than solely the city of Detroit. But as the biggest unit of government in the county and an important one, we want to make sure that's a strong working relationship and cordial to the extent they can, right? These are politicians we're talking about, and we can't be Pollyannish about that. But as goes Detroit, so will go Wayne County, and we need that to be a strong working relationship. It is not tied together as it once was, but there are a lot of ways to build relationships and create that create those bonds that we hope for.
I had one more question too, and this just concerns, you said the hospitals. Are you talking about in Detroit that if the mayor has some oversight of hospitals, we're not talking about uh the Ford and Wayne State and
No, no.
no, no, I mean, we're
Um,
talking about the public health system? I didn't,
yeah, it's, you don't need to know this, but Public Act 217 of 1979 um, provided for the transfer of certain powers to the Detroit Medical Center Corporation, the DMC, and the transfer was contingent on the creation of a 10-member operating board of directors, and those members, the mayor played a role in appointing those members. Some of them coming from Wayne State, and those were nominated by the president of the university. So it, maybe a moment in time when this became necessary as the DNC was evolving in its legal status. But in that case, the mayor was, through state law, vested with certain responsibilities to facilitate that transfer.
okay, thank you, that's. And if nobody else does, I have another question, and this is it, I promise. But what would you see as the maybe three major skill areas that we could look for in a mayor that are the most important that you think after all your years of looking at this, at these people, and not at the individuals, but at the
Yeah.
role?
Well, I think since we are talking about Detroit, a sense of fiscal responsibility to not to lead the city down the path that led to bankruptcy, 12 years ago. And there were many mayors and many incidents that led to that status. But Mayor Duggan, I think, has understood that responsibility, understood what was handed to him with the bankruptcy settlement, and was able to parlay that into a strong financial status for the city now. It's important to keep that going. Related to that, I think Mayor Duggins and any mayor, regardless of what you think of Mayor Duggan, he surrounded himself with good people. He surrounded himself with people that understood the state law, understood their responsibilities as department heads, and I think we can say that about many people over the years. In some ways, I saw in Mayor Duggan. I don't know if anybody read the Doris Kearns Goodwin book about Abraham Lincoln, the team of rivals. Duggan would have people in the city that he understood were talented, even if they were not in complete alignment with his vision, and try to bring them into the team and try to get everybody rowing in the same direction. So fiscally responsible ability to recognize talent and bring it into the team. And then it's late in the day. The thought went in one ear and out the other. I think just being the strong voice for the city, being the ability to tout the city with economic development, with on the the evening news and everything, and cast a positive light on the city.
Thank you. Those sound important.
Ruth, there's another question in the chat.
Yes. Cheryl asks, can you speak to the role of ethics in the position of the mayor?
Yeah,
This is
obviously very,
Cheryl Terriot. I want to point out it. I didn't do this again. I'm sorry. Cheryl, good question.
um, obviously very important, just a few years still removed from everything that went wrong with Mayor Kilpatrick. The Detroit City Charter has in many ways been strengthened with the ability to identify ethics and see them through. So the mayor is responsible for appointing people, the ethics board, um, and putting that structure and empowering that structure to work. But then he or she, just like city council, has to step away from that and let that body work. So the role in ethics is to be ethical, but beyond that, just make sure that the resources are in place and the people on the ethics board are capable of doing their job and have the resources to do their job.
Well, thank you.
That's great.
Do we have more questions? I think we may be done.
Yeah, I think it's the witching hour for me.
Yes, all right. Well, thank you, Eric. It was very informative as
Yes.
always. This recording should go up, if everything works, in a week or so on the library's YouTube sub-channel for the League of Women Voters program.